Hello, folks. Thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar from the National Renewable Energy Lab and the State and Community Energy Programs in collaboration with the EPA. Looking forward to diving into some of the capabilities we have available for state and local governments, as well as other partners on the SLOPE platform. We'll start in just a couple minutes as we wait for folks to join in. Thanks so much for being here. All right, really appreciate again your time today. Look forward to engaging with hopefully some good questions from the audience. Definitely put your thinking caps on for this one, guys. My name is Dr. Katie Richardson. I am a principal investigator on the State and Local Planning for Energy platform here at NREL. We're delighted today to bring you an overview of clean energy planning with SLOPE using one of the key platform elements of SLOPE. We're doing this work together, of course, with the State and Community Energy Program Office at the Department of Energy. We have with us Nina, who is an ORISE fellow at DOE. We'll hear from her in a moment. We're also working in collaboration with the EPA. We have today Emily Bolger, the technical, really happy to have Emily with us, who runs the helps support the Community Pollution Reduction Grant. So Emily, if you don't mind sharing a few words of introduction with us, we would appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks Katie, and thanks to the SLOPE team for pulling this training together for today. And yeah, so I'm Emily Bolger. I am coming from EPA's Climate Pollution Reduction Grants Program. And if there are any questions regarding the CPRG planning grant requirements and SLOPE's usage in meeting those requirements, I will be here to answer questions during the Q&A session. But just please note that EPA cannot answer CPRG implementation grant questions at this time. So back to you, Katie. Thanks for having me here today.
Thanks so much for being here, Emily. Really appreciate it. I think the CPRG grantees who might be joining us on the phone, hopefully will find some of the information that we provide to be a good resource as you begin thinking about some of those priority climate action plans or implementation grants that you may be thinking about applying for in the spring. Each of those elements of the CPRG program could be answered in part by some of the data available on SLOPE. Certainly also the case across a number of, whether it be DOE or other federal grant opportunities that are flowing towards communities these days. So really happy to be engaging EPA in this way with SLOPE data. I'd also like to introduce Nina Wirch. We're so happy to have you and collaborate together on the SLOPE platform. Would you like to share a few words of introduction from SCEP? I think I've got a slide to share as well.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining us. And thank you, Katie, for the introduction. So my name is Nina Wirch. I am part of the Office of State and Community Energy Programs, which it has celebrated its first anniversary of being set up and established, and we're moving into year 2. But a lot of the work that we do is focused on energy justice, on the bipartisan infrastructure law, and the formula grants, competitive grants, and technical assistance that comes with helping move the United States towards clean energy in a sustainable, equitable manner. So thank you, Katie.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Nina. We really appreciate doing this work in collaboration with the SCEP office. So with that, I'd like to share a little bit of an overview of what we hope to cover today. For those of you who may not be familiar with SLOPE, I'd like to provide a brief overview of how it came to be and the kind of data that you can find there. I'd like to get a little flavor of the audience that we have with us today. SLOPE is an applicable platform across a number of different personas and stakeholders. And so I'd love to understand a little bit about who's joining us. We'll be able to dive in to the scenario planner of SLOPE. This is really the element of SLOPE that is most critical to thinking about, we're here in 2023. What are the modeled projections for 20, 30, 40, 50 in energy consumption, in carbon emissions, et cetera. So we can take a look at that planner and how it came to be and dive into a live demo together. There are certainly some tips and tricks that we think about for using the scenario planner and SLOPE in general, and I'd like to share some of those with you. And if you have any tips and tricks that you have in mind to share with the group, we certainly appreciate that. At the end of the day, data is incredibly powerful, but it's powerful because we embed it in stories and context around communities. So certainly want to dive into a little bit of those nuances together. And really, Q&A here, we've got some time allotted at the end for questions and answers, but I'd certainly encourage you to include your questions as we go through that live demo. I'd rather answer them in the moment for you as it's coming up for the group. And then we'll also reserve some time at the end if you've got anything that's still in your queue. So with that, we'll go ahead and introduce the SLOPE platform. So SLOPE has been available through the support of the Department of Energy, State and Community Energy Planning Office, actually for a number of years. And it is a free and easy to access online platform, really designed to help energy planners who are trying to meet community energy goals and thinking about and planning for the community's energy future. There are two different tools to the platform. As I mentioned today, we're going to be focusing on the scenario planner. We're looking at modeled projections of consumption, emissions, system costs, and that data is available really for the first time at the county level as well as the state level. So if you're representing a county, certainly excited to provide that level of granularity to our data in these projections. This is a tool that can be helpful for inventory work. If you are a CPRG grantee joining us today, this could be related to doing some inventory work. It's obviously modeled data, but we can dive into that a little bit today. The second component or tool that is available on SLOPE is the data viewer. I think there are more than 50 data sets now available on the data viewer that cover renewables, energy efficiency, sustainable transportation, lots of really great equity data, some economic impact benefit numbers through jobs, available through the data viewer. If you are interested in the data viewer, I do highly recommend that you register for our Friday webinar as well, which will also be recorded if you can't make it on Friday, but we'd love to share some information about that side of the tool as well, and that will be on Friday. One of the things that I really love emphasizing about SLOPE is that it represents a collaboration across the Department of Energy. So there are technical offices within EERE, the Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy Office of DOE, that have all contributed analyses for the nation across national data sets for vehicles, for solar, et cetera. And that is what we are integrating together in one place on SLOPE. So hopefully we are a first stop shop for you to think about DOE data. And then hopefully we're also a launching pad to the next set of DOE and other federal resources that might be available to help you do your work. So that's SLOPE in a nutshell. So why would you care? What is really SLOPE all about, right? From where you sit, we are hoping that SLOPE supports you as you both plan your goals as well as saying, okay, I've got a 2050 goal. What does it mean if I back that up? And what milestone would be appropriate for 2030, 2035, 2040? How do I tell if I'm on track for my goal? That's something that we can explore a little bit together with the scenario planner today. We also hope that SLOPE is supporting you as you begin prioritizing your resources, right? This is both about your time. Certainly planners in serving states and counties are extremely pressed for time, especially with so many funding opportunities coming out. Which ones do you respond to? In what ways should you prioritize and stack your clean energy projects as they come up. We also hope that SLOPE is supporting you in designing your policies and programs in a way that creates the most impact for the community you're serving. We certainly believe that the equity data we have available should enable you to engage the correct stakeholders and be inclusive in that planning, both in terms of who's at the table at the beginning of the process, as well as who is included and impacted through the investment of those resources. Certainly another example of the way that SLOPE is being used by communities is to support, whether it be funding applications or other resource applications like CPRG with the EPA. That's an example, but there's a whole host of acronyms out there. And we hope that SLOPE data is helpful to you as you're responding and crafting those applications. And then we also believe that the SLOPE visuals that we have provided that are, again, free, available online across data sets, we hope that those visuals and those numbers can help you tell and communicate the story of the good work that you're doing around clean energy projects. And that could be communication via social media channels, that could be communication to the public in stakeholder meetings, that could be communication in your county commission meeting or city council meeting. So certainly hope that you're using SLOPE in that way. We'd love to be cited when you do. We'd love to hear about how you're using SLOPE, but certainly hope that that is one of the ways that we are able to support your work. So I'd like to switch over to some polls. So hopefully we can bring up the first one so that you can respond to it in Zoom in the native application here. How familiar are you currently with the SLOPE platform? Perhaps some of you are joining us for the very first time, have never heard of SLOPE before. Maybe some of you have heard of SLOPE, but have not used it yet. Maybe there's a little bit of exploration. Maybe you're a SLOPE expert and you just wanted a little tips and tricks. Feel free to answer there. All right, I see with answers are coming in. It looks like almost a majority of you are learning about SLOPE for the first time. So really welcome, you're in the right place. Hopefully this will be useful to you. By the end of the hour, you'll be able to navigate the SLOPE website with ease. A few of you have heard of this, but never used it before. So that is fantastic. And then those of you who have explored SLOPE a little, welcome back. Really excited to give you a little more detail today. All right, let's take a look at the next poll. Let's see. All right. So the second poll here that we have is around which sector best describes your organization. So I'd love to get a feel for who's joining us today. Federal government, state government, local government, tribal government. You know, these are some of our core audience. We also have, let's see, is the poll open? So sorry,
yeah,
Jen.
it should be, but I don't see, let's try this again. I don't see any answers come in.
There may be some folks representing, thanks, Jana. There may be some folks representing regional organizations. Certainly another example that we will share later today is around a regional organization, perhaps energy services providers, consultants, higher public education, nonprofits. Looks like there's a really good mix today. So welcome, really excited to see the folks who are in the audience, lots of state and local governments present as well, about a third and a third in that other category across the board. So welcome everybody, you're all in the right place. Hopefully our data is helpful to you. So feel free to jump in as we go along. And then let's see, I think we have another poll here. What energy planning activities are you presently working on that require data? Select all that apply. So really curious to hear from the community where you're working these days. Lots of, let's see, almost everyone so far is working on creating energy and/or climate goals, roadmaps, or strategic energy plans. So that's certainly a universal need, it seems. Maybe 3/4 of you, trying to keep up with the poll here. Half of you are developing an emissions inventory. So that's going to be really relevant for the scenario planner and what SLOPE can provide. Let's see, applying for funding applications or fulfilling reporting requirements. Certainly something that takes up a lot of our days, right? So excited to hopefully deliver value there. Designing programs or policy, weighing priorities. Lots of folks weighing priorities, communicating with decision makers and the public, also a popular choice. And a few of you, hopefully you'll learn more if you're not sure yet by the end of the webinar. Thank you so much for responding to our polls. And I think we have, let's see, one more.
I think that's it on my end.
Oh, that's it? Okay.
Yep, and we did have a question. Oh, sorry, Katie. We did have a question in the chat asking what the color coding on the map is showing on the screen.
Yes, apologies. Yes, so if you can see my map here, we are this is just an example map of the United States. This happens to be a screenshot from SLOPE. It is showing technical potential for utility scale solar, I believe, is what this background map is, but it's just indicative here of some of the places that SLOPE has had the opportunity to impact communities, whether that be state or local governments in their work. So just as an example, here we have, for example, the Atlanta Regional Commission has been able to dive into some of our equity data and use it to think through how electric vehicle charging stations can be planned for their region. We've also done some work with Sarasota, Florida, to identify commercial buildings footprint and how that could inform the policy that they were considering. We've worked with the city of Frankfort, Kentucky, the capital of Kentucky, in communicating some benefits. They saw the clean energy job stats for their community and said, wow, you know, we focused on renewable energy, but there's so much opportunity with energy efficiency as well. We want to make sure that we're capturing that economic benefit for our community. And they took that data and fed it directly into their city commission. We also have seen with work with Milwaukee, Wisconsin, how they have been able to prioritize their focus in rooftop solar and energy efficiency. So again, that's about weighing resources back and forth. So these 4 examples on the map are all examples of the way that data viewer data has been used. But today we get to dive in together with the scenario planner. And the state of New Mexico has used the scenario planner in thinking through some of their planning, their goals, and their milestones, thinking through, they've got a 2040 goal in this particular case, and how can they make sure that their grid is prepared to meet that goal, and the technology and community is behind that effort. So just some examples from across the nation. And feel free to keep the questions coming, really appreciate it. All right, okay, let's see, let's see. I would love if anyone is comfortable putting in the city, state, county, region, tribal nation that you represent in the chat. Certainly would love to see where everyone is from, but feel free to do that as I move on. I think we are ready to dive in a little bit around the scenario planner. So this is the tool on the SLOPE platform that I've mentioned a couple of times that helps you project from 2020 to 2040 or 2050, excuse me, around emissions, carbon emissions, as well as energy consumption. The real, gap in the market that we saw around data when we were building the scenario planner is that, many places had these 100% clean energy goals. This number is a little bit old, about a year old now, but so many cities, counties, states are making these commitments. And yet we know that you guys are so busy that the communities only have so many dollars. What is the way to sort of bridge this need, and how can we create complex future models that provide that cross-sector projection? So we built the SLOPE scenario planner to meet this need. We really want to help you and the communities you work with visualize your energy future. This is all about building that scenario, viewing that future scenario, and comparing scenarios for your locality, and exploring the trade-offs and priorities, and identifying what are those planning metrics that can help you realize what the journey that you're on. And consider what are those comparisons for system cost, for emission impacts, for, at the state and the county levels. So this is really the statement from the scenario planner. I think what's important to realize is that the scenario planner was really built on the expertise of, the DOE and many models coming together. And it's really all state of the art, first of its kind, first, best in class combination of those DOE models that sits as the backbone of SLOPE. There's also quite a bit of flexibility here. You're able to dial in a scenario of interest. You're able to see across sectors what's happening with renewable energy or, transportation. Each of the sort of, building sector, et cetera, you can sort of see residential, commercial. And then we have county level results. So we'll talk a little bit about how that translates to cities, if you're a city or if you're a region, like a tribal government, for example. I see Cedar Rapids MSA may cross county boundaries. I'm not sure, but it may. We can talk a little bit at the end about how that gets interfaced together. And then at the end of the day, we hope that this is accessible to you. It's free, it's online. Hopefully you'll be able to follow along with me as we go through. All right, and I see in the chat there's some resources, fantastic, for the 23 states that have 100% clean energy goals. So things have changed a little bit since that stat was put together. Thanks for catching that. All right, I had mentioned earlier that there are DOE models at the backbone of the scenario planner. These are those models. If you're an energy geek like me, these brands may mean something to you, but these are all DOE invested, NREL led models and analyses and studies and scenarios that we are integrating together to create the scenario planner results. There's a 30-page methodology document that if you really want to geek out, that's this place to dive in as to how these different results are stitched together in order to create the scenario planner. But at the end of the day, what you end up with is some strategy combinations that you get to explore at the county or state level. All right, yep, we can provide that link for you, Daniel, as well. So at the end of the day, we do have 99% of US counties included. There's some exceptions. We are missing some Alaska and Hawaii data on the scenario planner as a result of what is covered in those DOE analyses. We're not able to provide data that does, and studies that have not been conducted yet, but everything that we have, we put up on the site for you. And we are really grateful to connect with over 12,000 users annually and growing. And we're excited to welcome you to the SLOPE family today if you're new to SLOPE. All right, so let's go ahead and switch over to a live demo. I think that's what everyone is here for. There is going to be a link in the chat to the SLOPE platform. I always just Google NREL SLOPE. But if you've forgotten the URL, but this is a great time to bookmark the SLOPE website. And what I'd like to encourage everyone to do, if you've got a couple of monitors, if you can switch back and forth between the webinar and your browser, go ahead and pull up your browser, link it into SLOPE. And what I'd like to encourage you to do is for your locality, maybe it's an example county, maybe it's a state, go ahead and follow along as I go so that we can sort of discover together what is available on SLOPE. And I will say, let's see, so here we go. So here is the SLOPE website. Hopefully you can see my browser here. And this is the homepage of SLOPE here. Lots of information is available. If you want to do this, share with your colleague this resource, there's a quick how-to video that you can take a look at as well. And there are two slides to SLOPE. I think I've mentioned scenario planner here that we'll dive into today and the data viewer. So go ahead and click on the scenario planner if you're following along at home. And what I will do is walk through an example and chat with you as we go let's see. to demonstrate the use of scenario planner. So here in the control panel on the left-hand side, there's an opportunity to type in your location. So I saw somebody is supporting the state of Tennessee. You can begin typing Tennessee and click on that state. I'm actually going to use the example of Fulton County, Georgia. So this is the seat of Atlanta, Georgia, and a regional coalition called the Atlanta Regional Commission is a coalition of, I think, 11 counties. We worked with them together to take a look at some of the scenario planner data in the past. So I'll use them as an example. So as you type in your location, you click on it, and then you can see on the right-hand side, there is a chart that populates with some information. So the default here is an energy system metric. You can select these. We'll take a look at energy consumption first. And without changing anything else on the control panel, all we've done is type in our location. What we immediately get is a reference case scenario. So you can see all of these choices are just a reference case. And what we mean by reference case, you can sort of see here a description. You can click on read more. It's a business as usual projection. So this is just situation is normal. What's taking place today is what we're projecting into the future. And you can see,
Katie,
yeah.
my apologies. We had a question that came through really quick. Can you do this by census tract instead of county?
Great question. So we have some census tract availability in the data viewer. So if you're joining us Friday, we'll have a chance to dive in there to get together. We do not have scenario planner data at the census tract level. And I suspect that we won't ever have census tract data available for the scenario planner. And the reason is these kinds of projections are already being disaggregated from state level data. And so in order to be both accurate and appropriate in the modeling that we're doing, I think that the finest level of granularity that we can provide really is at the county level. So if you're a census tract, representing a census tract, thinking about a project in a census tract, I would suggest presenting county level data and then having a discussion about whether or not that county level data might be reflective of your census tract, right? So perhaps you know that your census tract has a lot of industry in it. That might, be informative, right? Maybe that would scale your results. So we can talk a little bit more about sub-county data as well as aggregating multiple county data if you're a region, if you're an MSA, if you're a tribe, at the end here. But yes, this data is available at the county level and it's available at the state level. I hope that answers the question. All right. And it was not a dumb question at all. This was great. Okay. So looking here then at the chart, we have energy consumption information for Fulton County, Georgia, in my example. I hope that everyone's able to follow along. This data is presented in millions of BTUs on this axis, and we project from 2020 to 2050. You can see as I hover over the chart, let's say that Fulton has, some interest in 2030 or a 2050 goal. You can dial in and take a look at both the total numbers as well as the sector by sector numbers, and that might hover over. Our legend here at the bottom tells us a little bit about what we're looking at, and that's the energy consumption by sector. So for example, transportation on electricity. These are all of the, I think, conventional engine vehicles on the road and the energy consumption that represents. You can also see there's a tiny, tiny sliver, you can barely see it, of electric vehicles on the road in a business as usual case. You can also dive into sectors like residential electricity, residential non-electricity. So think, you're building heating if it's natural gas, et cetera, commercial electricity. And you can really see the breakdown of energy usage in the community of Fulton, Georgia. Oops, sorry. Sorry. Okay, so one of the things that is worth taking a look at here is the relative abundance of, or use of energy in this particular county. In particular, I draw your attention to this blue wedge, and that transportation fuels component really represents a significant portion of the energy consumption in this particular community, and often ends up being the case. And so this is a way to potentially begin talking about what sectors are using the most energy, where energy efficiencies might be utilized. All right, so that's a very simple use of the scenario planner. And what you may be interested in and say, well, I'm a CPRG grantee, I really want to take a look at some of the emissions implications. What's my emissions inventory, right? So if you want to look at those modeled results, you can switch over to the comparison view. So if you click this comparison view button right here in the control panel, you can see that a second chart pops up on the scenario planner. And we can, for that second scenario, dial in and take a look at carbon emissions together and how that breaks down by sector. So again, you can see some of the implications of power plants of various kinds coming offline and online here in the Georgia region, but you can dial in and take a look at the relative emissions piece. So here you can see easily that transportation fuels, residential electricity, and commercial electricity are the most significant contributors to the emissions profile. And if you did some math on that, you'd discover that that's about 80% of the carbon emissions in Fulton County, Georgia. Just so that you're aware, as you sort of move this slider around the chart, you do also get those numbers here in a table. So if you wanted to do some quick calculations, this is a great place to grab some numbers and do some number crunching off screen. You also, just in case anyone wants to go into deep analysis, can download the data for your region using this download button. Anytime you want to grab that, that's available for you as well. So what's interesting then is if we just compare 2020 levels between, if we just take a look at 2020 levels of carbon emissions, this business as usual scenario does in fact project that carbon emissions will decrease for the county, right? So in Fulton County, Georgia, if you compare this total number to the total number you start with in 2020, there's about a 22% emissions reduction in this particular reference case. Feel free, again, to jump in with any questions if you're not able to follow along. If I'm going too quickly, I'm happy to take some time and dive in with you. So how might we then begin utilizing the scenario exploration that's available through the scenario planner? If you click on the scenario planner, control panel again, maybe we adjust scenario 1 to look at carbon emissions as well. So we're comparing apples to apples. Previously we had energy consumption on this side. And maybe we want to imagine a greener scenario for Fulton, Georgia. So perhaps the grid is going to become more green. Maybe there's some plans to bring on solar onto the grid so that those residential buildings and commercial buildings that are pulling power from the utilities will be more green. And you can see then in this side-by-side comparison that the relative reduction will take place. You could compare 2050 to 2050 here, what green scenario versus a reference case, and you discover that you could achieve about a 24% reduction in emissions in this kind of scenario. You'll notice in this particular case that the blue wedge, those emissions that come from our conventional vehicles on the road is still pretty significant and is in fact the largest contributor to emissions that remains once we green the grid, and that makes sense. So that's certainly something to dive into. Maybe we'd like to explore a scenario that layers solutions, not just green generation on the grid. What if we are also working to electrify our buildings? What if we are also working to bring more EVs onto the road as a community? So you can go again over to the control panel, switch which scenario we're dialing in. So let's take a look at scenario 2. Maybe we've got that green grid I mentioned, and maybe we are also increasing the level of electrification for our buildings and our vehicles. And you can see now, side by side, that we have a greenest, sort of a reference case previously that we looked at, green and greenest solution to take a look at. And again, we can compare those 2050 emissions side by side. And in this case, we've achieved a 75% reduction in total emissions by pursuing these types of solutions. So I really love seeing these examples side by side. This kind of comparison feature is one of the important utilizations of the scenario planner.
Hey, I wanted to flag that we have a question that came through. Perfect. It looks like you saw it. So
yeah, let's see. It says, you mentioned the underlying data is from all over DOE and other places. Are the projections a result of NREL's analysis based on current reported levels of emissions, megawatt hours, BTUs, et cetera? Or are the projections a result of state work and the total aggregates from them? So this is a great question for us. So the modeled work that you see here is a combination of nationwide analyses. The dates vary, but sort of 2020-ish, from Tempo, Reads, DGen, these tools that DOE has supported and developed with NREL's help to support communities and states. So it is really as a modeling effort across the nation, rather than reports up from states or localities. We'll get into this a little bit, but I think it's worth saying, if you as a planner have access to, depending on what size of entity you're representing, like if you have your utility bills and you're a city, it's worth taking a look at those, right? Like the truth of the data sort of is even more refined as we get closer and closer to the local source. So please keep in mind, this is model data projections due to national analyses and studies. Great question. Okay. All right. I also want to just make sure that we dive in for a moment to what's, if you scroll down, all the goodness that happens if you scroll down. So we certainly have this table, which I mentioned, it's just helpful, but I really love these planning metrics here that are available with the little icons. These planning metrics, I do want to warn you, are at the state level only. That's the level of fidelity that we believe is appropriate for displaying this data. But it's really like asking the question, where are these technologies going to be if we see the kinds of emissions profile that is displayed at the top? So as an example, here on the left-hand side, we see a level of electric vehicles on the road of about 11% in year 2050. And that's because we're imagining a scenario where there isn't significant electrification of vehicles. So that's, in this case, a reference case of sorts for vehicles. But on the right-hand side, in the even greener scenario, we're imagining widespread electrification, and you can see 84% of light-duty vehicles are electric on the road in this scenario. So this really gives you an idea. Okay, if I want to realize 75% emissions reductions in 2050 relative to this other scenario, then I can use the percent of electric vehicles on the road as a marker as to where I need to be in 2050. You can also dial that back. Okay, how can I tell if I'm on track? Let me dial back to 2030. This then maybe gives you an idea, a milestone, a stepping stone. I'm on track for that 2050 goal because it's 2030 and I've got about a third of vehicles on the road that are electric. So I hope that makes sense. The idea that the scenario planner both helps you understand what sorts of scenarios can realize a particular emissions reduction or particular energy consumption savings, and then how is that reflected in the technology that we see being implemented across the community. All right, just one more thing really quickly here before I switch back to my presentation. I do want to showcase here, you go back to the control panel and you turn off comparison views. We just look at one thing at a time. Make sure that we've got the right scenarios selected, a greener grid, green vehicles and green buildings. And let's switch to the energy system metrics, the system costs. So again, this data is only available at the state level. Really lots of caveats worth stating here. System costs are for the system as a whole. It doesn't necessarily reflect who is benefiting from the particular system costs. And let's see, this is still loading. So I'm going to go ahead and switch to my PowerPoint so you guys can just see this, what would come up when it's still loading. Hopefully you can see my PowerPoint, but this is an example of the system costs that will show up when you're dialing in for the state of Georgia, grid decarbonization and that widespread electrification scenario. What you can see here is above zero are those investments to create this green scenario. It doesn't say who isn't making that investment. So it's spread across parties within the energy system and depends on business models, et cetera. Below zero are all of those things that are realizing savings for us, right? Whether that be costs in providing fuel to a coal plant or costs in pumping gas into your vehicle, right? All of those are savings. And so in the black, you see an annual net system cost or savings for each year. So you can take a look and realize that in Georgia, this is just a model, but as an example, these kinds of investments can begin realizing yearly savings in 2037. So that gives you a feel for what some of the trade-offs may be in the state of Georgia. Certainly lots to explore here if you're a state and you're thinking about the system as a whole. So that might be relevant for those of you joining in from states. Okay, maybe I'll just pause for a second. I feel like that was a lot. I'll see if there are any questions. And if there aren't, I'll switch over to some tips, tricks, and next steps.
I would also like to share that hopefully you all have the opportunity to raise your hand. So if you raise your hand, we can also unmute you if it would be easier to voice it in person.
Okay, thanks, Nina. I appreciate that. All right, hearing none. Put your thinking caps on. Let me know at the end of the webinar if there are some other questions that have come up for you. I hope you've been able to follow along. Just some tips and tricks. I often get the question, can we download the slope visuals? Can we download the charts? I'd like to include it in my funding application or in my presentation to the council or commission. Great question. I think we all live in a virtual world these days. If you haven't learned yet how to take a good screenshot of this is sort of how to do it on Mac, on a PC. But what I really want to emphasize here is what to capture, right, when you're doing that screenshot, making sure that you're including that key information, the title, the legends, the axes, what jurisdiction the data is for, or including multiple screenshots so it fits on your PowerPoint slide. Certainly you might want to think about, we have that hover over feature. Do you want to include that hover over? Do you not want to include that hover over? And how can you customize your screenshot? If you're a community that's got a 2040 goal, make sure that slider is like pegged to 2040 before you take that screenshot. We certainly always appreciate citations as well. So go ahead and grab, we have a citation there on the screen for you. You can just copy and paste it. Hopefully we're making this as easy as possible to include slope data. Just a couple of other things. I mentioned a few times how you can use scenario planner data if you were either within a county or trying to represent multiple counties. One thought, if you were a city or a census tract, maybe a census tract, I don't know. But if you're representing a city, think about what's the appropriate way to scale the information that you're looking at. Can you scale by population? Would it be appropriate to scale by area? Depending on the data you're dealing with, you may want to think about that. And then certainly you'll want to discuss any assumptions that you may have, right? So if, for example, again, if you're a city where a lot of industry is centralized, it may be inappropriate to just scale the county level data because perhaps all of the emissions from industry are really coming from within city limits. That may not be the case, right? You know your locality best. And so describing, contextualizing that data, again, telling that story is is our responsibility as planners. And I know that's something that you guys do and understand every day. Certainly on the multi-county area, metro, MSAs, regional organizations, tribal governments, we do not have the ability within SLOPE to add counties to the visuals. If 1, 2, 3, 4 counties, we don't have that, but you can download the data for each of the counties individually. And so you can take that data, you can, figure out whether that's adding it, maybe it's presenting it separately, maybe an average is helpful, depending on what analysis you're doing. Those are some of the approaches that I would suggest that you consider if you're representing a multi-county area. I'd also like to just emphasize again that we at NREL certainly recognize the community as experts. I know that planners are doing this as well, making sure that you've got the right stakeholders around the table as you are approaching data-centered work is really important. Understanding that our data, again, is representing national analyses. It does not necessarily have that localized perspective or that local data approach. So we certainly encourage you to treat that community as experts, identify what the real truth on the ground is, seeking that high quality local data wherever possible. Multiple data sources is always great. Identifying that, hey, if you've got that energy bill, then that's really, really meaningful. And certainly we wouldn't want to be contradicting anything that to be locally true for the particular group that you are serving. All right. And then just a word about equity. Certainly, I know that the DOE has a Justice 40 initiative and has equity as centered in its approach. Anytime we are pursuing equity with clean energy planning, we understand that SLOPE does not perform equity for you. Just because you're using SLOPE does not mean that equity is going to be box checked, right? We need to have that equity in mind. You guys are the ones who are able to implement that in the most effective way. If you're joining us for our Friday webinar, which I'd encourage you to do, we've got lots of equity data on the data viewer. So another layer to consider and think about who's at the table for your planning process, who are you serving with your projects in order to have equity in mind. And speaking of, we are very, very excited that coming in January of next year, which is just around the corner, we are going to have air quality planning metrics for the first time on SLOPE in the scenario planner. So under that energy system metrics location, we won't just have energy consumption, we won't just have carbon emissions, we're also going to be adding SOx and NOx emissions. And so these are air pollutants that have an important impact on air quality, human health, and we'll have that broken down by sector for the NOx emissions. So it's really, really wonderful to see those and begin exploring those in the scenario planner as well. All right, let's see. And then it's also worth saying that in January, and this is probably the most important fact, the scenario planner data is going to be updated to fully reflect the Inflation Reduction Act. We understand, I think, in this community how significant the changes are to the law here for clean energy uptake and adoption and the pursuit of projects through lots of federal opportunities. So certainly stay tuned to the way that data may change as we get the appropriate scenarios plugged into the scenario planner to reflect the Inflation Reduction Act. So certainly, if you aren't yet, sign up to be on our SLOPE outreach list, and we will notify you of that. So I'd like to just do a couple more polls. If folks have some questions, feel free to put them in the chat, but I'm curious, after this time together, how you envision using SLOPE. Really appreciate your feedback. Jana, can we get that poll up?
I am having issues with the polls.
Maybe
perhaps we could just have people write in the chat until this unfreezes for me.
Yeah, no problem, Jana. Yeah, if folks want to pop into the chat, any ideas you may have, if you are thinking about using SLOPE data, how it might plug into your work. Maybe it's about communication, prioritizing investments or other. Great, I see another Richardson on the call. I love that. A, B, C, and E, and F. Lots of these. Okay. I'd certainly be happy to have conversations offline as well. Our email is slope@nrel.gov if anyone wants to reach out after the webinar. Thanks, Nina. All right, goal setting, roadmaps. These are popular responses. Program design. Thanks, folks, for chiming in. I really appreciate it. All right. I also want to just, again, advertise that we've got a whole host of questions that Slope data viewer can help you as communities answer, whether it's got to do with equity, efficiency, buildings, renewables, decarbonization planning, et cetera. Please feel free to join us on Friday if you haven't registered yet in order to dive into the other data sets that we have available thanks to the DOE and our collaboration together. And they may also support EPA, CPRG recipients and grantees and many other planning opportunities. All right, Chris has got a good question in the chat here. How can we develop other model constraints, e.g. 50% reduction in residential sector by 2030? This is great. So we are able to reflect within the scenario planner. Let me see if I can bring that back here. Oh, maybe I closed it. Sorry, there we go. Within the scenario planner, we are able to reflect certain planning scenarios. So 95% grid decarbonization by 2035. We do have some energy efficiency opportunities to explore that I didn't have a chance to discuss. But each of the scenarios that we have within the planner are described in detail here, as well as someone asked for the link to the methodology. This is that 30-page document I was referring to earlier. So at the bottom of each scenario planner page, you've got a link where you can say, I don't quite understand what it really means, best available energy efficiency in buildings. This is where you want to go if you want to dive into the way those DOE models are really coming together and stitching together to produce community results. We are not, what I want to emphasize here is that these are pre-baked scenarios that have been identified as priorities by the DOE and part of the stated scenario study. It's not a dial where you can say, oh, I want to have 40% reduction or 50% reduction, right? What you'll have the opportunity to do is look at some of those pre-baked scenarios and sort of extrapolate from there or interpolate, hopefully, and say, okay, this is a little bit to the left of what I have in mind, this is a little bit to the right. It gives me some bounds on what I can expect for my particular planning process. So great question, Chris. I really wish we could turn the dial the way that you're suggesting, but we're able to provide these pre-baked scenarios for you and have these results across some 3,000 counties in the US for free. So hopefully supportive of any inventories that are happening in the background on the call. So hopefully that answers that question. I did also want to emphasize just again, the data download button is available if you have a particular county selected. As an example, you can click this download button and get data across the different scenarios for your particular county or state. That's available. And then we've also got that methodology link here as well. Any other questions from the group in the chat?
It looks like we have some other questions. I see, how can we develop other model constraints, for example, 50% reduction in the residential sector by 2030?
I think we may have just answered that if I'm
Oh,
correct.
okay.
Katie.
No
But we
worries.
do have one about how would you describe differences and similarities with other available simulators like energy innovations?
Yeah, great question. I certainly think that some of what makes SLOPE unique is the set of DOE models that we're, basing our modeling on, our energy modeling on. It's also worth emphasizing, DOE, EPA, the federal government is not being prescriptive. We're not saying use this, not that. It is just another tool in your toolbox for you to consider. And again, as I mentioned, multiple data sources, multiple models is really a great way to begin taking your thumb to the picture and saying, all right, I think that this is where we're headed, and here's the reasons why we can go there. One of the things that I really love about SLOPE, free, online, accessible across 3,000 counties, right? So it's at your fingertips. I know not all the tools out there really make that description, and really encourage you to explore the range of possibilities in front of you. And we hope that SLOPE is useful to you. We'd certainly love your feedback as to how you're finding that it compares. What would be useful to you? And Chris is partially answering my question. He says, it would be nice if SLOPE could take glimpse GCAM output and disaggregate it to the county level like a post processor. Thanks, Chris. We'll put that one in our pockets and noodle on it a little bit. Any other questions as we wrap? If not, we really appreciate everyone joining you. We appreciate the collaboration with EPA and the support of SCEP. We also invite you to join us for our Friday webinar if you are available, and it will also be available via recording. Nina, do you want to close us out with any comments?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank everyone again for their time. Please, I put the email in the chat, reach out to the team if you have follow-up questions. We have a couple minutes. I'm happy to stay on for a bit longer. And if questions come through, please type them. But please have a lovely day, everyone.
Thank you.